friend of mine in case, it just to, and hey Jan. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there's a couple of reporters, but I'd much rather answer a student's question first. Are you just here to listen?
Sure. I guess, let's see. Are there any issues that you feel that you have a personal opinion on that you feel differ from most environmentalists?
Oh, that's a great question, and I touched on it a little bit. I got a little lost when I lost my speech. The sequencing of, but one of the pieces that I was going to talk a little bit more in a little bit more detail to make the point that I did mention, which was this idea that environmentalism and capitalism can't be seen as being completely at odds, because last I checked, there's not an alternative economic system under which we can function. But I worked, for instance, at the Nature Conservancy on these forest carbon projects, and a lot of or some environmentalists took issue with us taking money from industry and working on these carbon mitigation projects. I loved that work and thought it had incredible value because it did something that I think we as environmentalists need to do more of, which is put an environmental service value on our resources, our water, our forests, our productive soils. And that requires us to think differently. Regulations are necessary, but ultimately I think will be insufficient to get us where we need to go. To forge a sustainable future will require legislation and regulation, but it will also require individual action, and it will require us as environmentalists to find new ways to work with industry to solve the challenges and problems we have. And so, you know, whether that's a difference on an issue or more of a philosophy, I'll let you be the judge. Yeah. Other questions?
Are you familiar with the TPP?
No?
You're not? Okay, they're presently trying to pass that in Congress right now. It's a trade agreement, another trade agreement. And so I was going to ask you what your opinion was on it.
I'm not,
and how it would affect your I'm sorry. It's not going to affect you.
It's all right, that's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I wasn't able to hear your presentation, but can you comment on the stories that have been out of the last couple of days about your commissioner?
It's always the
Your
worst time.
commission being directed not to use the term climate change in Wisconsin. Where that came from? Was it Governor Walker's office?
No, it came from the state treasurer, who's one of my 3 board members, and he took issue with my service on a previous governor's global warming task force. He went so far as to accuse me of theft for serving on the task force. Fortunately, the Attorney General voted against that allegation, but they did go on to then pass a resolution saying that we could not engage in climate change work during work hours. And
The state legislature?
no, the board of commissioners. And so I think my personal view is it would have been appropriate for them to say that you shouldn't work on climate change policy advocacy without the board's direction or approval. But that's not the way the resolution was drafted, ergo the controversy.
And the controversy is that it seems similar to the directive in Florida that state officials not use the term climate
People
change.
very quickly made that connection.
Is it valid?
Well, I actually have been so overwhelmed that I haven't looked at what Florida did, so I would not want to comment on whether it's a valid comparison, because all I know is what I heard anecdotally, and a lot of people have made that connection, but I honestly don't know what Governor Scott said or did. So but I can assure you this was the act of the board, and the board is distinct from other branches of government, the executive or legislative branches of government.
What does it say about the idea of climate change denial?
Yeah, you know, what I think is unfortunate is that we're not having, you know, there's no point, in my view, in debating the science, right? But there's real valid debate to be had about what to do about climate change. And we're deluding ourselves if we suggest that there isn't a cost to addressing the climate change issue. There's a substantial cost. I would argue that cost is the cost of inaction on climate change far exceeds the cost of taking the right actions on climate change. What we ought to be debating is what to do about it. That's a fair debate, because there are going to be trade-offs, and there are going to be costs, but the costs of inaction are much greater. And you know, you really don't have to look much farther than the insurance industry, or look at, and I had this in my speech, but I didn't remember it, look at the report that Hank Paulson and Michael Bloomberg and Tom Stouffer just put out called Risky Business, assessing the risk to Californians of climate change. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we know we can do. Conservation and efficiency. What's the cheapest energy out there? It's the energy you don't use, right? Why would you not incentivize through policies and incentivize through other programs, greater investments in conservation and efficiency? That's a no-brainer, right? So some of the choices are going to be easier than others, and some of them are challenging. Putting a price on carbon is going to have an impact. Otherwise, why would you do it? That's the point, right? And so, can you do it in a way that's fair and equitable and address the disruptions that come with a policy like that? You know, that's what we ought to be talking about. How do you do it? Can you do it?
And just to follow up with that, you know, you've drawn a connection very strongly in your speech and now between the economy and the environment. And
Yes.
I think that your fellow board member, the treasurer, has distinctly disagreed with that, and he's kind of used that in a quote that I read as justification for raising this kind of ban. But being on that board and as a public official and an environmentalist, you know, does this decision, do you feel that it ties your hands at all, that you're not able to draw those two pieces that you see as
well, the irony is that the task force wrapped up its work 7 years
Right.
ago, right?
But for the future, for example.
But you know, any resource manager has to consider the impact of climate change on the asset it's managing, right? And so I would argue it is relevant. A timberland manager, go look at Plum Creek's website. Look at what Plum Creek, you know, one of the biggest timber companies in the country, says about climate change. It does, as a practical matter, I wonder, why are we debating something I did 7 years ago under a different rule? But I would, just as a matter of principle, I just wouldn't, I wouldn't allow it to go unchallenged to say that climate change doesn't affect our forests, or climate change has no relationship to our work. I respectfully disagree with that assertion.
Sure, but so that's the principle side of things. But in practical matters, is it going to affect your ability to perform your role as a state official to the best of your abilities, to not be able to have this sort of censorship? Is that at all a concern that you have?
Can I talk about that later?
Yeah, talk about that later. I understand these are dicey things, but and of course, well, you could only even talk about it now because you're on a vacation day.
I'm a citizen of this great country, exercising my First Amendment rights.
Well, how about, let me rephrase it. Just speaking more generally, being the daughter of Gaylord Nelson and Earth Day being about, as you mentioned in your speech, raising awareness and starting that conversation. And you touched upon this a little bit in your speech. But, is there sort of an extra personal reaction that you have to these censorship efforts? Or, is there...
Yeah, this controversy and others like it, I think we ought to think of it as a gift. A gift to precipitate conversation, a gift to remind us the importance of being an informed and engaged community. And I, you know, in my speech, which flew away in the wind, but it had some prompts in there. And when I talked about the importance of individual action, I also said, you know, whatever you do, vote. I mean, I think minimum civic duty at least has the following two things on it: being an engaged, informed voter, and recycling. I mean, it's sort of minimum civic duty as far as I'm concerned. And so, sometimes controversy gives you an opportunity to have a conversation that wasn't otherwise happening. And so I see this as an opportunity. And it's important for people to use their voices and to engage, to demand leadership. There are a lot of people who hadn't thought about it, you know, and hadn't thought about climate change and why would it impact forests. They just hadn't thought about it. It doesn't mean that they don't care. And so if this is an opportunity for people to think about things in a way, things they hadn't thought about, or in a way they hadn't thought about, then that's a good outcome, you know?
Do any of the other students have questions?
Anybody else have questions? I see, I want to thank everybody who's wearing a green shirt, because I know how hard you guys worked today. So I'm really grateful for that, and it really was special for me to be here at my father's alma mater.
Did you have questions for yours?
Oh, yeah, but I was going to have focus.
Yeah, it's fine.
So you're Gaylord Nelson's daughter, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Nice
Oh,
to meet you.
yeah,
I'm from Wisconsin.
Yeah. Like I said, it's like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
You didn't have to buy a ticket.
Well, when you start working, when you're in 50 years from now.
Yeah. Oh, a nice one. Thank you.
Because I know this lighting makes it down to yellow